the young, and the restless spoilers. In the sterile, cold corridors of Genoa City Memorial Hospital, the tension was palpable. Sharon, Nick, Daniel, and Heather stood in the hallway, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. The air was thick with the unspoken fears and dread that clung to each of them, as they tried to make sense of the calamity that had brought them all here. What could have led to such a disastrous event, one that left their loved ones fighting for their lives just beyond those sterile, unyielding doors? Inside the emergency room, the doctors and nurses moved with practiced urgency, their faces masked in both literal and figurative senses. They worked tirelessly to stabilize Faith and Lucy, two young women whose lives now hung in a delicate balance. The news that had reached Sharon and Nick was nothing short of terrifying. Faith, their daughter, was once again in critical condition, and this time, the stakes seemed even higher. Only a few hours earlier, the day had begun like any other. Sharon had spent her morning at Crimson Lights, managing the cafe and chatting with regular customers. Nick had been busy at New Hope, focusing on his latest project to build affordable housing for the city's less fortunate. Daniel and Heather had been wrapped up in their own lives, unaware that a storm was brewing just beneath the surface, one that would soon engulf them all. The first indication that something was wrong had come from an unexpected source, a frantic phone call from a passerby who had witnessed the aftermath of a car crash. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, barely coherent as they described a vehicle that had veered off the road and plummeted down an embankment. The car had been badly damaged, and it was clear that the occupants were in serious trouble. As the details slowly emerged, the horrifying truth became apparent: Faith and Lucy had been in that car. It was a chilling déjà vu for Sharon and Nick. Not long ago, Faith had been involved in another life-threatening accident, one that had almost claimed her life. Back then, it was Adam, her uncle, who had stepped in to save her, donating his kidney to give her a second chance. The memory of that harrowing experience was still fresh in their minds, and now, it seemed they were reliving the nightmare all over again. But this time, the circumstances were even more dire. The rumors had already begun to swirl around town. Whispers that Faith had been behind the wheel, that she and Lucy had been drinking, and that their reckless behavior had led to the crash. The car had careened off the road and tumbled down a steep hill, where it lay crumpled and twisted at the bottom. It had taken the emergency responders what felt like an eternity to extricate the two young women from the wreckage, and by the time they were airlifted to the hospital, their conditions were critical. As they waited for news, the parents' emotions swung wildly between disbelief, anger, and a deep, overwhelming fear. Nick, always the protective father, could barely contain his rage. How could this have happened? Faith had struggled with so much in the past: substance abuse, mental health challenges, and now this? He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, not after everything they had already been through. Sharon was equally distraught, but her mind was already racing through a dozen different scenarios. She knew Faith had been struggling, trying to find her place in the world as she transitioned from adolescence to adulthood. But she had never imagined it would lead to this, a night of reckless abandon that had nearly cost her daughter her life. Daniel was a wreck as well. His daughter Lucy, whom he had only recently begun to reconnect with, was now lying in that emergency room, her future uncertain. He had been trying so hard to be the father she needed, to make up for lost time, and now it seemed as though all of his efforts might have been in vain. The thought of losing her, just as they were beginning to rebuild their relationship, was almost too much to bear. Heather, normally the voice of reason, found herself at a loss. She had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm in a crisis, to see things clearly when others were blinded by emotion. But now, as she watched the doctors and nurses rush in and out of the emergency room, she felt that clarity slipping away. She could see the fear in Daniel's eyes, the raw desperation in Sharon's and Nick's. And though she tried to offer words of comfort, they sounded hollow even to her own ears. Inside the emergency room, the situation was grim. Faith's condition was particularly precarious. The accident had caused severe trauma to her already compromised body, and the doctors were working against the clock to stabilize her. They knew her medical history, knew about the kidney transplant that had saved her life before, and the implications it held for her recovery now.